Mexican records got the lights down low. Souldisco where the groovy people go. Hit play, let the music flow. Old school beats with a modern glow.
Hello everybody and a very warm welcome back to the latest episode of Hidden Jewels of Soul and Disco. I do hope you're doing absolutely fantastic. In this week's episode we are featuring the first family of soul, the Five Stairsteps.
I think it's about time that we get underway with the show, and I couldn't think of a better way to open the show than with the people that I'm about to introduce. They're a family that we have kind of fallen in love with. And now, hush, I'm trying to get on with the show, dum-dum. Now, they're a family of people. They're from Chicago. They sing, they play musical instruments, and in general make people awfully happy. If you will say hello to the Five Stairsteps and QB. Here they are.
What my father wanted me to be, I tried to give my daughter and son the best of me. But who do you belong to?
Five Stairsteps, aka the Stairsteps, were founded around 1959, and it was actually a group of 4 brothers and 1 sister. Betty, their mother, came up with the name because when everybody was standing right next to each other, they kind of looked like stair steps, therefore the name. Betty and Clarence Burke Sr. immediately saw the talent of their children and they pursued them to go into a musical career. And that's what they did. So from 1959 up to 1964, they attended school functions, talent contests, went into churches, every place you can imagine to get your name out there. But who were the members of the group? We do have Aloha Jean, Clarence Jr., James, Dennis, Kenneth, who will be later known as Kenny, and for a short period of time we have QB. Still going into school, actually going to the Harlan High School, they still tried to have a career next to being in school. The turning point for the Five Stairsteps came in 1965 when they appeared at the famous Regal Theater in Chicago, which has, in my humble opinion, the same cultural impact as the famous Apollo Theater.
While this community offers many forms of entertainment to its citizens, probably the most outstanding is the theater. At the Regal, all ages congregate for wholesome and educational entertainment. Such diversion places this theater as an important part of Hatai's life. G.W. Logan, its manager, realizes this and works closely with his theater chain owners in order to bring his patrons the type of entertainment they desire.
They won this contest, and according to Kenny, they competed next to the Jackson 5. Winning this contest means that you also get a record deal. And also according to Kenny, they were offered a record deal with Motown Record. But things turned out differently. Their neighbor, Fred Cash, who was also a member of the Impressions, heard about that. And he thought, well, if they win first prize, they have to be good. So he asked the group if they could audition for him. And that's what they did. And he immediately brought them together with the legendary Curtis Mayfield. Curtis heard them and he also immediately signed them to his record label, Windy City. Windy City was distributed by the Cameo Parkway record label. And in 1966, they released their first singles, and these were Don't Waste Your Time, Come Back. On the B-side, we have You Don't Love Me, World of Fantasy, and on the B-side, we have Play Girls Love. In 1967, they released their debut album, and it was self-titled and called The Stairsteps, and it became a success. They also continued to release singles, but unfortunately in 1967 Cameo Parker closed its doors and therefore Windy City was sold to Buddha Records. The second album, now on Buddha Records, was released in 1968 and it was called Our Family Portrait, now including the smallest, tiniest member of the group, QB. Also, what I think is very special to point out that on this record you get copies of pictures from the family picture book. So if you wanted to have, as a fan, a glimpse into the life of the Brooks household, this was your chance. In 1969, the third album followed, also including QB this time, with Love's Happening, which was then released on Cartoon Records. 1970 would be the most successful year of the Stairsteps, because in early 1970 they released a single which was written by Stan Vincent and was called Ooh Child. That single sold in a short period of time over 1 million copies and became and was awarded with a gold record in August of 1970. This song was included in their next album, and here it is in all of its 70s glory, which is called Stairsteps. I always wondered when I found this copy some time ago what kind of pressing this is. I always assumed that this one is later pressing because it included a print of including the hit single Oh Child. But actually this was not the case. If you find copies with this, and it also includes this, it's also very likely that you have an early pressing. Because what happened was that the single was so successful, they included it on this album and printed the hype sticker, which is obviously not a sticker, it is printed on the cover. It says including Oh Child. This song was so successful, as I already mentioned, that they were invited in many TV shows. This success led to their first compilation album later in 1970, which was called Step by Step by Step. They also took part in the concert film from the Isley Brothers at the Yankee Stadium, which were there also being featured. In 1971, the Stairsteps released yet another album which was also called Stairsteps, and they still had charting singles on this album. In 1972, Aloha decided to continue her educational work, left the group, and then later went on to work at the Emory University, where she also became a guest speaker. Billy Preston in the later 70s introduced the remaining members of the group to George Harrison, and he put them on his label Dark Horses, which was then distributed by A&M Records. And this led to an album release in 1976 which was called The Second Resurrection, and it featured a hit single which was called From Us to You, which became the biggest hit the group had since Ooh Child. Actually, this was the last album of the group, and they kind of seemed to parted ways, but two members of the group stayed in the music business. And especially I want to point out Kenneth Burke. Kenny released his solo debut on Dark Horses, but also still kept in touch, of course, with his family members. And Clarence Jr. also decided to continue in the music industry, but he didn't want to do it himself. or singing all alone. So he asked his brother, Kenny, if they could do a band together. And the results of this were the Invisible Man's Band. After that project, Kenny continued to release solo material. And I want to point out a release in 1982 from his album Changes. And Changes included a single which became, also in retrospective, one of the biggest early 80s hits you can imagine. It was called Rising to the Top. But let's hear some of the Five Stairsteps story from Kenny himself.
Well, you know, the 60s, I mean, speaks for itself, that, you know, that era of music. And we came up in Chicago, which is a very well-rooted town, you know, in good quality music. And people like the Impressions and Curtis Mayfield and, you know, Smokey Robinson, the Miracles, Gene Chandler, I could go on and on. So we came up under that kind of era of music and being very young. So we got a good, we had a good, strong, I think, reference point of quality, knowing the difference, you know, and performing with those great artists as kids. Come on, I mean, what else can you say? You know, you know, you're having fun, enjoying doing your own thing, and then you get to stand in the wings and watch the Temptations. Yeah. And watch Smokey Robinson of the Miracles and you know, Gladys Knight and the Pips, and you're there seeing this. So, no, it's just, it's priceless.
Then you founded, together with your 4 brothers, the Five Stairsteps, and the breakthrough was in 1965 after the singing contest at the famous Regal Theater.
Correct.
And I heard that also the Jackson 5 attended to this contest, but you won the show and were offered a record deal. Is this true?
Well, yes, it was a large talent show, and the Jackson family were from Gary, Indiana. And there is a little age difference you have to also take into consideration, because Michael was 5 years younger than me. So if I'm the youngest of my family, you can see, you know. Now, the oldest brother, Jackie, is a few years older than me, but there's an age difference. So we were the first family of soul. We have enjoyed, you know, the success. We had an opportunity to do a record deal with Motown. We passed on it. My father felt that we would have a little more creative control, and took that opportunity with Buddha Records at the time. But yeah, we had won that large talent show and went with Curtis Mayfield and did our own thing.
Sadly, some members of the group has already been passed away. But I want to point out that this group left behind a tremendous amount of legacy over decades. So I highly suggest that you check out this group. They were absolutely phenomenal. And especially in the mid-60s, they became role models for many American households where parents thought that children had musical talented or were talented and were trying to build a group. So this was the group before the Jackson 5 became famous in 1970. If you want to have original copies of their records, they are out there, they are affordable and available because they sold like crazy. For example, this one you can find between $20 to $50, of course, depending on the condition. But if you want original pressings, they are out there. If you like that episode, I highly suggest that you check out the playlist appearing here, and I catch you on the next one. Have a great week.